But the man who was really being fooled was Hans. He was pure German, according to Nazi standards. To him they promised everything, and he fell for it. That's how Hans became a Superman. They gave him a uniform and they pumped up his ego. He wasn't just a little fellow out of work anymore. He was a member of the master race. Hans and thousands of others like him, all playing a sucker's game. They gambled with other people's liberty, and of course they lost their own. A nation of suckers. Hitler needed these people. There was lots of work to be done. There were trade unions to be smashed, because unions were organized and might offer resistance. There were many political parties in Germany. These the Nazis destroyed. They were determined to smash every organization where people might band together and resist them. There were Jews to be beaten and killed. The Jews were not powerful, but they were a convenient excuse for all the nation's ills. And besides, a Nazi party member could not take over this man's store. Hundreds of Catholics were put in jail because the Catholic Church had strength and could resist the Nazi drive for power. They had split the nation into 100 pieces, and then one by one, they had destroyed the pieces. Over these broken pieces, the Nazis rode into power. One party, one nation, one religion.
Are we even pro-free speech?
No, of course not. But we have to use this platform in order.
So we're being radically honest here. And
yes.
Now, in accordance with the club's rules, when someone leaves the group, I will now repeat the words of the great Jambi. Mecca lecca hi, mecca hiney ho, mecca lecca hi, mecca Johnny ho. And I was also required to shake up this beer and smash it on my head. Unfortunately, the studio here said they would not let me do it here if I did that. So you'll have to just imagine I shook it, imagine I bumped it, and watch me jump. Oh, it's warm. Oh, it's warm beer.
These men had won their struggle for power. They now ruled all of Germany. But still they had trouble with their oldest and most persistent enemy, the truth. They found that truth does not die easily, and so they decided to abolish truth. One great source of truth is literature, so they burned books, 20 million of them. Many great men in Germany who were spokesmen for truth were jailed or driven from their country. Teachers, writers, scientists. Education was discouraged. In 5 years, college attendance dropped 53%. It was forbidden to listen to a British radio program or read an American newspaper. In Nazi Germany, you had to get your information from Dr. Goebbels. He knew what was best for you. The church was one force in Germany still strong enough to proclaim the truth in public. This Catholic priest was arrested the following day on charges of immorality. The Protestant church also continued to try and fight for truth. The Nazis put this man in a concentration camp. There were others who spoke for truth, and I am proud to say that educators were among them.
And what, may I ask, is an Aryan? I don't know myself. But let us see what our present so-called authorities have to say about him. They say he is tall, slender, blue-eyed, and blonde. There is no Aryan race. And more important, there is no master race. There are people who may find these ideas convenient, but science cannot support them. There is no scientific proof that there's any correlation between a man's racial characteristics and his native ability or character. In all racial groups, we find the same range of potentialities. We find idiots and geniuses. We find criminals and philanthropists. We must judge each man as an individual and not by the color of his skin or his eyes or by the length of his nose. Come in, gentlemen. It's comfortable. And remember that there is no master race. That is a scientific truth. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying.
Now, I'm a free speech absolutist, but direct threats of violence are one thing that doesn't even pass the free speech absolutist test. In other words, nobody of sane mind is going to say, yeah, you're allowed to directly advocate for specific violence and get away with it. So on that front, you have to judge each one of these on a case-by-case basis, and in my opinion, some of the deplatformings are way more reasonable than other ones. So that's the one that they give for the Proud Boys. For Milo, it's a little sketchy because they're saying, hey, listen, it's because he was associated with the Proud Boys. Now, the Patreon CEO had said, you're only going to get pulled down from Patreon if you violate basically our terms of service, but it's on Patreon. So in other words, they're not going to dig into your past and go to something you said on YouTube in 2008 or something that, you know, was in a video that was then posted on Twitter by somebody else at this time. So by their own original standard, it seems to me that even though I despise Milo Yiannopoulos with every fiber of my being, I mean, the dude, they're saying it's because you were associated with the Proud Boys, even though you disavowed them, that's why we're going to pull you down. So that strikes me as sketchy. Now, the next one is Lauren Southern they pulled down. Now, Lauren Southern is a far-right commentator, and the thing that they pointed to her is that she did fundraising for a group called, I think, Defend Europe, and that group was partaking in literally, I think, turning away refugee ships or something like that. Like, basically trying to run interference to stop the saving of refugees. And so they basically said, hey, listen, Lauren Southern, you're raising money and you're involved in criminal activity. So that's, how can we know that that money that you're raising is not going towards criminal activity? So we're not gonna let you fundraise on our site.
Okay guys, welcome to part 2 of Deplatforming versus Free Speech Absolutism. The bulk of this video is a debate between Hassan Piker and Kyle Kulinski on this very issue that I have inserted myself into periodically. I highly suggest, if you haven't watched part 1, that maybe you watch that first. It covers a lot of the broader issues that are relevant to this argument, while we get into the weeds of the ridiculous knee-jerk arguments in relation to this issue in this video. I think you can watch either one of them kind of stand alone by themselves, but I do think that a lot more things will, you'll have a much better perspective on this video if you do watch the first one, so whatever. But, you know, really, with no further ado, here we go. This is Hassan Piker and Kyle Kulinski talking about deplatforming and free speech absolutism, and me, Reverend Aaron, butting my big fucking mouth in all over the place, all throughout it. And sometimes I get a little fucking pissed off, and I think I should probably assert before we get into it that I don't fucking hate Kyle Kulinski. It may look that way in this video because he really pushed some serious buttons of mine in this, and I think I clearly explained why I took offense to some of the things that he said, but it's not my intention to be Jimmy Dore. Okay, I don't want to utilize my platform to bring down people who aren't progressive enough, or some purity fucking leftist test. There was a lot of things in this video that I really agonized over, to be frank with you, that I wanted to pull out of the video and just not comment on, because I knew that me commenting on these statements made by Kyle would cause me to get really fucking pissed off. So I was like, how do I just pull those out so I don't have to do that and then call this dude a bunch of fucking names? But the arguments that would cause me to respond in that way were central to his broader argument. They had to be left in, and I couldn't address them in any other way than the way I fucking address things, man. I think I held my arguments well. I meant Kyle no disrespect, but he was seriously off fucking point on a lot of shit. And I think that his off-pointness has a real-time effect, adverse effect, on this whole discussion of deplatforming. So let's just get fucking into it. All caveats fucking given. And with all due respect to Kyle, and again, that's not like, with all due respect, you suck. I don't mean it that way. I think that people should listen to Kyle Kulinski. He has a far better fucking analysis of things than people like Rachel Maddow or fucking Wolf Blitzer and shit. And when people like Kyle Kulinski and Hassan Piker have discussions like this, it's fucking fantastic. You can be like, oh man, Kyle's a progressive and I'm a socialist, and so he's not talking my shit. But it gives us a better conversation to critique, as opposed to what like Chris Matthews was talking to Bill Kristol about. So I find it very valuable, and I really appreciate that Kyle took the time to have this conversation with Hassan, which, as I think you'll see, Kyle was not all too comfortable having this conversation all throughout it. And it's a long one. Okay, so let's get into it.
I mean, on a personal level, I actually like Sargon. I did 4 or 5 streams with him, and he was a very nice guy.
Oh God,
but,
I wouldn't go that far.
Well, he lost me when Progressive Voice asked him what he thinks about Trump, and he just kind of flat out said, "I'm a Trump supporter," and I was like,
Yeah,
"Wow!" And then he asked why, and his Progressive Voice asked why, and Sargon basically said, like, he triggers the libs kind of thing, and I was like, "That's so vapid, and that's so silly." And I'm amazed that a guy who's able to think as well as he does, like, that's the conclusion that you came to. And then he really lost me when he, in my opinion, smeared Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and did a segment, I think it was titled Red Cortez, and basically accused her of being a democratic socialist in the original sense of the term, which obviously means post-capitalist, when whatever you think of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's actually just a standard social democrat. I mean, she may call herself a democratic socialist in the same way Bernie Sanders calls herself a democratic socialist, but they're both standard social democrats. They're not post-capitalist. So that's when he really lost me. But to get to on the issue of deplatforming,
he's not
honestly,
smart. Let's just, before we get further in this, I have to push back on Sargon being smart. He's not.
But that's just an opinion. That's just an opinion.
Okay.
I mean, I disagree with the guy on so much, but that's just an area of opinion where we can agree to disagree.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so there's a number of problems with that. For starters, look, man, it's not a matter of opinion whether Sargon is this really smart, nice guy. One, he's not smart, and two, he's most assuredly not a nice guy. And just because he plays the nice guy persona, just because he pretends to be interested in the issues that maybe you debated him on in all of those 5 fucking live streams that you platformed him on, he was using you, man. He was playing you, Kyle, that whole time. And if you did a little bit of homework on him and understood where he was coming from and the intent with which he's motivated, you would understand that he is the farthest thing from a fucking nice guy. Now, look, what his level of intelligence, sure, that's debatable, but I will say, and I will argue confidently, that you do not have to be a smart person to follow this recent 21st century trend of this fascist, but we're really not fascist narrative of finely tuned and strung together sort of dog whistle narratives, which Sargon has positioned himself in such a way where he knows he's the perfect centrist. He can pretend to be open to, you know, the liberal marketplace of ideas while still at the same time playing to far right narratives, because he wants all of them to follow him because there's money in that fucking scenario. Now, you could say, oh, he's a genius for having figured that out. I disagree with that notion. I think that that's a very, very easy thing to figure out. You just have to be an unscrupulous fucking piece of shit to follow through with it. So to call him a nice fucking guy because you got along with him well on some podcast where that's his whole shtick, is to play this nice, attentive, empathetic, listening centrist, when in truth he's just doing that so at any point and any opportunity he can, he will push the subversion of every issue because it has play in the far right market. It's not nice. And I don't think that this makes him intelligent in any way whatsoever.
But on the issue of deplatforming, I think I have a principled stance against deplatforming, because I think that when we talk about the principle of free speech or free expression, yes, we all get that it's not like whatever, like they're trying to do with Tucker Carlson now, for example, among others. I get that it's not literally a violation of the First Amendment, but it absolutely is a violation of the principle of the First Amendment, because censorship doesn't just come from the government. Censorship comes in a variety of different ways. And deplatforming, whether people support it or not, it is censorship. It is a form of censorship. So I think I have a principled stance against it because I feel it's gross. It's gross. It's just let people speak, even if they say horrendous things. And also, take Tucker Carlson. Let's say this succeeds and he's off air. It's not like Noam Chomsky is going to replace him. They're probably going to get somebody worse to replace him. So it's like all this energy spent towards deplatforming somebody, and you don't even get anything for it in the end. So, I mean, I just have a principled disagreement with it, even though you and I, in terms of our sensibilities of what a lot of these people say, we might totally agree on those points. But it's the reaction to that I disagree with.
So what you're ultimately arguing, Kyle, is that anybody and everybody is owed the financial backing of the world's largest corporations as advertisers. And if they don't get that, if one of these disgusting fucking corporations decides that things that Tucker Carlson says on air isn't conducive to their fucking quarterly profit margins, so they don't want to give them their money anymore, that's censorship. Give me a fucking break, man. Why are we giving someone like Tucker Carlson, who perpetually lies, one of the largest platforms in the world? I mean, by your logic, then all these fucking corporations should be giving me money, Kyle, and they should be giving you money, dude, and backing us. We're being censored, homie, because Monsanto ain't giving us fucking money every month, or whatever fucking disgusting corporation it is that backs the Fox News channel. It's ridiculous, man. Come on. And all this energy wasted. I'm sorry. We are not regularly doing videos where we have to correct the bullshit narratives of Alex Jones anymore. His narratives are not having a massive influence on the minds of people in America, and we are far less having to undo the damage that he did to masses of fucking people. So don't give me this bullshit about wasted effort. And I don't want corporations having the power to decide who gets the major platform or not. And no one should have a larger platform than another unless, in terms of people being honest. If you're selling a bunch of fucking lies, why are you defending, seriously, I'm fumbling with my words because I'm dumbfounded that you think that a corporation no longer wanting to fund one of the largest platforms in the world as being censorship. And then saying again that it has no effect whatsoever when huge platforms held by some of the worst fucking manipulative liars are eliminated. It has a real effect.
So okay. Well, so I didn't know that you also had had a hardline stance when it came to collective action and deplatforming in that respect, or like using advertisers to put pressure on people in positions of power who are using their platform to spread hateful propaganda, especially when it comes to Tucker Carlson. And this is the same question I asked Glenn Greenwald and kind of dunked on him on Twitter about. But what is your perspective as far as like what can the collective do against people who are purposely misinforming and purposely spreading hateful rhetoric in an effort to red pill or change people's minds and push them towards the right or further radicalize them in really just awful ways?
The only argument that I'm sympathetic to on this front is just the idea that if you take somebody like Tucker Carlson or you take somebody like Laura Ingraham and you go through their record of everything that they said or you fact check them on any given night, I mean, I have no doubt that you can find 5, 10, 15 just flat out falsehoods in any given broadcast that they do. So if you come to me and you say, Kyle, listen, the whole reason why we're going to get rid of this person or that person for a job as a news person is because they're flat out not doing their job. They're just factually wrong in the things that they say. Well, then I'm open to that because that's just a standard employer thing. It's like, oh, well, I hired you to pave the driveway and now you're not paving the driveway. You're over there fucking my neighbor. You're fired because you're not doing your job.
Got news for you, Kyle. You're right on fucking board with our narrative. Okay, because check it out. They're not cleaning the driveway. They're fucking your neighbor. Okay, Sargon, Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McInnes, Lauren Southern, Stefan Molyneux, Steven Crowder, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham. They're all fucking your neighbor, bro. They're all full of shit and selling lies. And you just said you'd be okay with firing their ass if that's the case. And are you going to argue that all of these people can't be proven out and shown to have a long stream of fucking narratives and rhetoric that is just fraught with lies? Are you seriously going to fucking argue that? I don't think you are, man. It's like you planted your flag in this free speech absolutism bullshit that if you listen to the first video, you'll see that I think I sufficiently argued that that doesn't even exist and that Kyle is not a free speech absolutist. But you just argued our point, Kyle. They are fucking your neighbor, Holmes. They're not cleaning your goddamn driveway.
Yeah, but when corporations don't do that, how do you show that as a collective? How do you show these powerful corporations, these powerful institutions that currently are completely unaccountable and completely unelectable and can do whatever they want essentially? How do you tell them, like, we as the people, we as American people don't actually appreciate this. We understand that this is damaging rhetoric and we need to fight back. And counter messaging obviously doesn't work, but deplatforming does work.
But let me explain why that's so short-sighted. Because you look at, and I made this point the other day on Rebel Headquarters, you look at stuff I say. The exact same way Tucker Carlson makes you feel is the exact same way that I make any random Ted Cruz supporter feel. So when I go out there and I speak about how the textbook definition of terrorism is violence done against civilians for a political or religious reason, and then I explain in a clear empirical way that oftentimes the U.S. is the world's leading terrorist, when I say those words, that is so outrageous to so many people in the country that if we take the standard that you're laying out there, they can take collective action against me, and I have no recourse, because if you poll my opinion on that, and actually I would say it's a fact, but if you poll my belief on that, chances are over 60% of the country is going to say, fuck that guy, he probably shouldn't be on TV like that. So we have to, like, there's
well, there's a difference there,
wrong.
though, right? There's a difference there, right? So,
Not really.
I appealing to no, hold on. I'm gonna explain it to you right now.
No, with all due respect, son, I think I'll take it. Ain't nobody talking about feels, man. Sorry, Kyle. This is not about, I don't like the facts that this person is spewing. It's that they're not spewing facts. They're spewing lies. What you were spewing, Kyle, in terms of that international policy and that factual, historically verifiable reality, that's the distinction, man. It's not about, oh, does it make the public uncomfortable and they don't like it and it doesn't match up with their feelsy feels. It's about, Tucker's a fucking liar, man. And Kyle, you're not. And framing it in, we just don't like Gavin McInnes because he makes us feel a certain way, completely throws under the bus the reality that people who are genuinely damaged by the rhetoric that he spews. Maybe you don't feel it in your studio, Kyle, but the followers of Gavin McInnes, based on his long stream of narratives, went out and beat the living fucking shit out of a lot of people. And not just in the upper fucking east side of New York, bro. I seen him do it in Berkeley. I've seen him do it in Rhode Island. I've seen him do it in fucking Portland. Berkeley with my own eyes. Video in the others. But then they crawled up in the fucking rich-ass bougie Upper East Side and pulled the shit that they'd been pulling for the last 2 years, and people went, harumph, man. It's not about people not feeling good about facts and reality. It's about people are selling lies. And if they're doing so, we shouldn't fucking tolerate it.
So one, we're appealing to the majority, right? So if the majority is moving further and further to the right, and as it has in the past, like 20 years, I would say, especially like in the aftermath of Ronald Reagan, like era politics, as the left is moving further to the right, and the right is moving even further to the right, like with the Tea Party movement and whatnot, and now Donald Trump, that appeal to a majority is actually... that appeal to majority is leading us down this really, really dangerous pathway, especially when it comes to people who are very intelligent individuals like yourself, who try to make it seem as though white nationalism or white nationalist propaganda, which specifically states its end goal as the eradication of whoever is not in the in-group, as though it is on the same moral playing field as someone who's saying that America's military intervention is violent. I know that you know that it's not on the same moral playing field. But
of course it's not on the same moral plane. But the point is, we're not talking about what is objectively the case here. We're talking about people's perception of what the case is.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And that's why I said
it's an appeal to a majority, right? That's what I'm saying. It's still not logically consistent, especially when the and by the way,
not logically consistent is saying that the collective. It makes sense for the collective to decide against Tucker Carlson, but it doesn't make sense for the collective to decide against me.
The collective didn't decide against Tucker Carlson. His fucking advertisers did. And again, it's not about appealing to people's public opinion, man. It's about, are they telling the fucking truth or not? And it's about understanding the macro reality we're up against, which is far right totally fucking corrupted, totally wealthy and powerful capitalists run our fucking media and are perpetually selling narratives that are damaging to millions upon millions of people all over the fucking world. Hassan, that was a fucking incredibly astute fucking distinction that he pulled out to say, look, man, this is what we're up against. And your only response is, public opinion and whatnot. Public opinion is determined by the information they're provided with. And the largest fucking voice out there is providing them with some of the most disgusting fucking lies I've ever seen in my 48 fucking years.
That's not logically consistent.
No, I understand. There is certainly an element where we're trying to, especially because there's not enough education in this country, where we're trying to educate people on the right ways, and we have very limited opportunities to do that, especially on the internet. Do I think that this could be a dangerous precedent? Absolutely. But the right has been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah, but they've been able to. That's the point. The point is they're wrong, and I hate them, and I hate their tactics.
But no one cares about being morally consistent, or no one cares about.
I do. I care about that.
I know
very
you
much.
do, but in the end of the day, let's think about how it's something that you dunk on yourself, which is liberals trying to expose hypocrisy on the right. What do you think about that? You don't like that, right? You think it's ridiculous?
One of many tools, I think.
Yeah,
it's not the end all be all, though.
It's not the end all be all. It's one tool, but it's not. It's rather ineffective because the right doesn't give a shit. They're hypocrites. They're like, who gives a fuck? Look at Mitch McConnell, incredibly successful, absolutely evil human being, but he's a hypocrite, and he doesn't give a shit. Because in the end,
but you're saying let's be opposite hypocrites. Let's also be hypocrites in the other direction.
No,
and
let's use the same tools that the right is. Yeah, let's use the tools that the right has been using for years.
But
because
I see
it as a parallel to how the right has grown and how the right has been able to mobilize and how the right has been able to radicalize half the freaking country by doing exactly this sort of stuff. Absolutely, I think politically,
if they started doing
sense.
Property violence, that doesn't mean I would support property violence. I actually support nonviolent, peaceful resistance.
Okay, this one's kind of all over the place. The bottom line is we're not using the same exact tactics that the right wing is using. Now, I know in the first video I argued about it's more akin to us raiding their armory, and in some situations that applies, but that is not the argument here, and I don't feel that that's, even though Hassan made the argument, I don't think that was what he was ultimately trying to get at, because it's not about, again, us using their tactics. We're not. Their tactics are to lie and deceive and pervert the truth and to subvert the marketplace of ideas to sell oppressive capitalist fascism. What we're trying to do is say, look, man, this guy is a fucking liar, and on top of it, he's a disgusting racist bigot. That is not, by any stretch, hypocrisy. So, while I think that Hassan kind of lost his way a little bit on that discussion, I think he was getting at the root of it, that there is no fucking hypocrisy. We are saying they're a bunch of goddamn fucking liars, and that their lies have real-time effects in terms of weaponizing really angry, disenfranchised, ignorant people. That's not fucking hypocrisy.
And I understand that
I guess we have a difference in opinion on that one too. I think that structural violence is, I think structural violence is an absolute necessity. If you look at things like the yellow vest protests, that sort of violence against capital is oftentimes the only way to get your message across. What's more violent than the state, or what's more violent
Nobody's
than
saying
the
the
current
state's not
economic
violent,
system?
but you can get the same thing accomplished with a general strike, because if you make the economy grind to a halt, the owner class has to listen to you.
No,
I get the fact that you're saying, hey,
no,
listen,
I agree with that as well. I don't think these two should be separate from one another, but it is rather difficult, and sometimes you have to use the tools at your disposal, and this is why I publicly advocate for anti-fascism as well, and one of their tools is also to deplatform people, but like violence against capital is nothing in comparison to the structural violence imposed by the state.
You're doing comparisons. It's about moral principles.
Yeah,
you're
I don't
doing
have a problem
comparisons as
breaking
opposed to saying,
windows is what I'm
here's my
saying.
standard. Here's my standard as to how we should act, and I'm going to try to abide by that. You're just saying, I don't know, they're really bad, so let's kind of be bad too, but when we do it, it's good.
That isn't even remotely close to what he's fucking saying. And you're making comparisons, What kind of fucking discounting argument is that? It's not. Of course he's making comparisons, because that's the playing field. It's this massive global mechanism of capitalism that we're up against that oppresses the better part of 7 billion fucking people and leaves people in poverty and misery and devastation all over the fucking globe. People are migrating in massive fucking numbers in every fucking region of this fucking planet. That's what we're up against. And then we have in our little fucking online sphere, which should be and is the true free marketplace of ideas, a whole bunch of fucking people who are making a bunch of money selling lies that normalize that massive mechanism of global fucking oppression. And to say that anybody that stands up and utilizes any minuscule pathetic fucking tool at their disposal to fight against that oppression as being the same as that oppression is so fucking disrespectful, I can't even fucking find words, homie. Because you want to defend this flag that you planted a long time ago called free speech absolutism. And you just called the victims of global capitalist oppression the same thing as their oppressor. Get your shit in check, yo.
Yeah, I am, because
Okay, well, I think that's stupid.
because that's like saying like, okay, here, let's think about it this way then. World War II, like the U.S. military intervention in that instance was good.
Because Hitler was going to conquer the entire world.
But that's what I'm
totally legitimate,
saying.
and that's totally separate. If you want to talk about flat out defensive violence, I'm 100% on board. But when you're doing a protest and you decide to shatter the windows of some dude's small bakery where he ekes out a middle class living, you're a fucking asshole.
Okay.
You know what, Kyle? I like you, homie, but I'm going to call you a fucking asshole. Because ain't no one ever come out and smashed Joe Blow's fucking local bakery window. Joe Blow Bakery, dude, don't own fucking Target and Walmart and Bank of America. Those are the fucking windows that get smashed. So that's an imaginary asshole, Kyle. And I don't understand why you fucking pulled out that straw man fucking bullshit scenario. Actually, I do. It's because you planted your flag in an irrational fucking position and have decided you have to defend it. This is why I love Robert Anton Wilson so much. Belief is the death of knowledge. And you are ignoring the new facts that question your position.
I don't think that it is always correct. I'm not saying that it's always correct. I think it should be something that is used very rarely. But if there is widespread, if there's any sort of widespread mobilization where just simple strikes are not going to be enough, especially because simple strikes are oftentimes met with police violence that we often deem as normal, and we think is like totally fine because the state currently has a monopoly on violence, or what is acceptable violence, there needs to be something more than simply just saying, hey, we're going on strike, please, please don't cut our SNAP benefits and force us into a indentured servitude for like incredibly low wages, and actually apply those same beautiful free market principles you talk about all the time, the Trump administration. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, but I just don't agree on the tactics. I think if 25% of the country decided we're literally not going to work until we get a living wage, until we get Medicare for all, until we get an end to the wars, until we get the right to a union and a bunch of other policies, I think if that happened, they absolutely would have to listen to us because the economy would grind to a halt without us. But I also think that in the course of doing that, I would 100% advocate against doing any kind of violence unless it's defensive, because you have to appeal to people beyond our own insular group. And when you're out there and you're doing violence, that might turn them off.
Okay, nobody's out there doing violence. I'm not concerned with turning off centrists who don't know a whole lot about the real-time on-the-ground fucking conditions. What I'm concerned with is until that time where all those things that you just advocated for, Kyle, I'm so on board with you, bro. And have regularly, when I've had the opportunity to, been out in the street and advocated for those things as well. We've been advocating for all of that shit for decades, okay? But it hasn't happened yet. And until it happens, what are we supposed to do, Kyle? Are we just supposed to let these guys spew whatever the fuck they want on some of the world's largest platforms and influence the minds of ignorant, oppressed people? Get them to vote against their own interest, to vote in favor of their own oppression without knowing about it? And at no point has Hassan called for violence as a tactic in deplatforming. That's a straw man you keep trying to saddle him to and then put him in a position where he has to defend what's actually called fucking property damage. It's not violence. Breaking fucking Bank of America's windows is not violence. And actually, no one's advocating for that as a tactic in deplatforming. What we're advocating for is mass fucking mobilization to say, hey, you monopolies that run our social media, these people are disgusting fucking liars. They're trying to normalize oppression and sell it as fucking, incense and fucking peppermints. No one is advocating for a violent fucking response to that. We're calling for truth to win out over lies in our online town square.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, yes.
And violent protests do end up working when push comes to shove, especially in countries where there's a lot more class consciousness. And that's precisely why I mentioned France, because it was very successful in France.
Yes, so let me be clear about what I'm saying. I'm not arguing that I disagree with it and therefore it is also ineffective. That's not the point I'm making. So the point I'm making is I take your point that in many cases it's very effective. And in fact, there's a good argument to be made that in order for Martin Luther King Jr. to work, you had to have Malcolm X.
Yes.
And you had to have the Nation of Islam.
Yes.
So I totally 100% agree with that point. But my perspective is that even taking that point, we need to be principled. And I think we can achieve the same things by doing really organized, nonviolent resistance on a mass scale. Now, again, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you on that. I don't disagree with you on that at all.
Then there's okay. So then I just want to get back to one more thing about the free speech issue, because this is to me where the heart of the disagreement lies. So if you look at what happened in Charlottesville, where they were marching and saying white lives matter and Jews will not replace us, and they were saying, hey, let's keep up this Confederate monument, and that was the whole point of it. It was like a week or two later that they had another far right march, and I remember that making the news and it being a big deal because literally like a dozen far right people showed up, and then there were like tens of thousands of counter protesters.
Yes, this was in, I believe this was in Boston.
So to me, that's my ideal right there, because I know it sounds goofy when an idiot like Dave Rubin says it, like, oh, the free marketplace of ideas, bro. That's what like, he's a dumbass, and we agree on that. But it actually is true that that's an instance of the answer to the shitty speech was more speech. It wasn't censoring speech. And I think that when you look historically, all of the crackdowns on freedom of speech, they actually are used against marginalized people more often, because by definition, if you're marginalized, you're not in power. So the people in power will use speech suppression against marginalized communities, which is why, for example,
What they do.
There are cases against like the Black Panthers and Black nationalists and Black separatists where the government used speech repression against them. So the ACLU position of free speech absolutism, they take that position specifically because, hey, we understand the long-term benefits of defending the rights of this asshole Klansman, because if we don't defend his rights, well, then obviously you're not going to be able to defend the rights of the Black nationalist or the gay people marching through a very, repressive and homophobic town or whatever it may be.
Again,
so I think
the
that's
morality
the key point,
there,
and that's why it's important.
The morality there is what is important to someone like myself. Because when Black Panthers are fighting for their communities, they're fighting for marginalized people in order to achieve, in order for their marginalized communities to get to a level where they have enough material support from the government and they can do whatever they like. They can possibly be on an equal playing field to achieve the American dream or whatever, right? And this is a very simplistic view of what they're doing, but it's not the same as the ultimate goal of a white nationalist. It's not the same as the ultimate goal of a Nazi.
No,
the ultimate goal of fascism is to eradicate the population. If the ultimate goal of, and there are Black nationalists, for example, there are certainly Black nationalists who are for, I guess, Black power beyond what the Black Panther Party did originally, who are also equally anti-Semitic, because all conspiracies always somehow go back to the Jews. And those guys are bad, and I would be in favor of deplatforming them, especially if their movement got to a point where it was genuinely a problem. Now, I want to give you one quote from Hitler himself, okay? I want to quote the boy Adolf motherfucking Hitler here for a second. After Hitler took power, he said, "The only one thing that could have stopped us if our adversaries had, from the first day, smashed us with the utmost brutality at the nucleus of our movement." Now, the reason why I say this is because fascists understand that they're always going to be unpopular. Fascists understand that they're not supposed to be normalized. Another ex-Nazi, Derek Black, talked about this on a piece in the New York Times as well, with like Donald Trump's statement as far as there were very fine people on both sides. That sort of normalization allows fascism to grow and focuses and creates an environment that is unsustainable for marginalized communities. So it's understandable that the collective get together, and that's why the anti-fascist movement is a decentralized local movement where anti-fascists get together and fight back to protect those marginalized people in their communities. And that's precisely why I agree with deplatforming someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, who was a clear and present danger even beyond his words to members of whatever community he was visiting, where he would dox DACA students, or he would dox trans students and like dead name them. That sort of stuff causes violence to happen on marginalized groups. So of course the collective is going to get together and try to fight back. Now, if the Nazis were trying to make that same exact argument, and they try to do that, white identitarianism is definitely a thing. We can deal with that in a different way, but I don't think debating them and engaging them in the marketplace of ideas has been an effective tool, especially because we've been doing that for so long, and look where it has gotten us.
I actually just gave you a perfect example of when it worked. So I don't know what you mean by saying, oh, it's not working. I just gave you a perfect example, Charlottesville, and then the march after it where it worked.
Okay, so what apparently Kyle doesn't understand is the massive amount of work that went into making Boston's response fucking possible. One, first and foremost, doxing. Something that Kyle is, the impression I get from his past content, something that he's very uncomfortable with. But had it not been for the relentless efforts of anti-fascists all across this country doxing and showing relentlessly a community that didn't want to hear it, that wanted to hear that Antifa violence was unacceptable, and in the face of all that fucking lies and that massive propaganda campaign of lies against them, were exposing these people so that the masses and the progressives and the liberal centrists would understand the true threat. And it took some Nazi motherfucker murdering Heather Heyer for a lot of people to go, oh, all this shit that these anti-fascists have been telling us for the last year, maybe there's something to that. And had it not been for that relentless work, those thousands of people would not have surrounded that fucking gazebo in Boston that day. And not to belittle the fucking righteous efforts of literally every single person that came out that day in Boston, but that is not a winning strategy. That we have to be mobilizing in the thousands regularly to shut down their shit. And the way that they organize on the far right to perform those rallies and make them happen in the street is through the voices online. And now that they're being deplatformed one by one, coupled with the relentless efforts of anti-fascists all over this country coming out in those thousands every time they went out in the street, we're not seeing those rallies so much anymore. These people who have been left behind by our education system are not being fed as much of a steady stream of really disgusting, damaging, dangerous, weaponizing lies. And we're not seeing them out in the street every fucking week. They didn't stop organizing because a shit ton of thousands of people came out occasionally. Because that happened sparsely. Mostly, they were always outnumbered, but mostly it was barely. What made it happen was that continuous effort in the street coupled with a perpetual, again, unrelentless attack against their online media presence.
And let's also be clear.
Yeah, wait, you want to know why the post-Charlottesville march was tiny? Because of doxing.
Because everybody saw that they were assholes and the counter-protesters outnumbered them.
Because they deplatformed, they effectively, and in an almost militant way, fought back against the Charlottesville protest, and they doxed them. That was the most effective reason why Charlottesville 2, the Unite the Right Rally 2, was ineffective and had nothing. Like they had like 20 people in comparison to the thousands.
You are so you made a point there about, well, listen, the reason why we obviously had to deplatform Milo is because he's causing violence to happen. You need to read U.S. case law and understand these things, because that's the exact argument that they used against Black Panthers and people in the civil rights movement. They said, listen, you're coming here and you're spreading these radical ideas, and we're not going to take it in our white majority town because this is going to lead for violence to happen. Hey, you're prodding these good white people who see your radicalism and they want to come back and fight against it. So you have to understand the legal standard that you're setting up. It's not only going to apply where you want it to apply. Okay. And that's the main point that you're missing. And also, since you decided to quote Hitler and apparently how, oh, if we just crack down on free speech, obviously Hitler wouldn't have happened and this would have saved the day. Let me quote Noam Chomsky. If you don't believe in free speech for those you despise, you don't believe in it at all.
Okay.
And you know what else Chomsky said? Antifa is a gift to the right. This is the most predominant.
I love Chomsky, but I can disagree with him.
Intellectual on the planet, and he's saying Antifa is wrong because their tactics actually embrace what they say they hate about their enemy.
They didn't use case law to wipe out the Black Panthers. They used disgusting, oppressive, imperialist tactics of the COINTEL program, and the FBI like murdered Fred Hampton. They didn't use case law to murder Fred Hampton. In some cases, you can point to things and say, look, they use case law to hurt the Panthers. Yeah, but I think it was the bombings of their fucking headquarters and followed by a massive fucking importation and flooding of drugs into their communities in the wake of wiping them out extrajudicially. And then I gotta address this fucking quote Chomsky shit. First of all, Hassan quoted Hitler because Hitler would be literally the #1 most important expert to refer to in terms of what would have hurt his movement the most. There is no one more familiar with the inner workings of the Nazi Party and its weaknesses than fucking Hitler. So Hassan was astute as all fuck to quote Hitler in that way. And you couldn't argue the relevance of that quote, so you do what liberals who don't really understand Chomsky, because you're not a fucking socialist, Kyle. So don't use Chomsky, who is, as your argument. But liberals do this shit all the time. It's like, oh man, Chomsky said it. And so Chomsky said it. So you're wrong. Well, you know what? A shit ton of people on the left who are educated as fuck took serious fucking issue with Chomsky's coming out and calling Antifa the biggest gift to the alt-right. First of all, I'll just say from personal experience, I wouldn't call myself Antifa, but we do a hell of a lot of anti-fascist work at Punks for Progress, and being regularly told to kill myself by people from the alt-right doesn't feel like I've handed them much of a fucking gift. And also, regularly fucking coming out and organizing against them in the street, which has shut down their ability to do so every fucking week like they were just a year and a half ago. I don't see that as a big gift. Noam Chomsky is beyond fucking brilliant and one of the most unquestionably important voices of our time. But he's fucking wrong on this one. And here's the distinction between him making that quote about Antifa and Hitler making the quote that he did. Noam Chomsky is not a central figure in the Antifa community every single day doing the work that Antifa does. He's not connected to it. It's a disassociated bird's eye view, as opposed to Hitler's central from up in the guts of it, would know better than anybody view. So, sorry, Kyle, but saying Chomsky said it, aside from approaching near deification canonization status for Noam Chomsky, is not a valid retort to an argument. The reason Chomsky said something and the context in which he said it are incredibly crucial to the importance of his final statement. And in this context, a lot of us will argue that Chomsky was wrong. And so lastly, liberals got to stop with this crap that Chomsky said something, so your argument is wrong. Chomsky, as brilliant as he is not the do-all, end-all, final fucking voice on every single argument. That was, again, it's a regularly used bad form argumentative tactic.
Okay, so I don't have to always agree with Chomsky. There are certainly elements of Chomsky's rhetoric
you
that I
happen to
disagree
be
with, but I
wrong
think
on this point.
he's brilliant. He's brilliant, and we both love him. And he's really important in what do you call it? In helping me develop a better understanding of U.S. foreign policy and whatnot. But in the end, again, to go back to that same concept of freedom of speech, or the structural, like the system using freedom of speech against marginalized groups, already happens in the examples that you've already mentioned, but that shouldn't stop us from actively fighting back against that as well. And that's the whole point. Just because a law is actively disenfranchising people, you don't try to abolish the law. You try to make it better. This is the same example.
A legal standard has to apply across the board, Haas. A legal standard has to apply across the board. So in other words, you're
I
not going to
understand,
be able,
but legal
you're not going to be
standards
able to
oftentimes
turn around
don't
and
apply
say,
across the board.
wait, don't deplatform those people because I kind of ideologically agree with them. Don't deplatform this Marxist who happens to believe in political violence because I happen to agree with that Marxist. But do deplatform this asshole on the right who believes in political violence also. That's not going to stand in court. Like, that's not the way that this works.
Well, first of all, it would if we had incitement of hatred as an additional restriction that we have on freedom of speech, kind of like the already existing restrictions that we have on freedom of speech.
Total straw man. No one's arguing that. The argument is, are they fucking liars? And are they using the marketplace of ideas to normalize oppression? Far leftists sparsing out and discussing whether or not political violence is a useful tool or not should not be deplatformed. That's a fucking discussion that, like, this planet needs to have. Weighing the pros and the cons. That's very different than a Lauren Southern getting out and trying to convince the world that rape culture doesn't exist in America. I want to hear your arguments against political violence by these communists that supposedly are advocating for that, which I know a lot of communists and I don't hear that from them, but let's just say for the sake of fucking argument that they are. Fine, let's have that fucking conversation. That's the marketplace of ideas. And if you got a better argument against that seemingly imaginary argument, Kyle, then fine, bring it. But you're not arguing against a fucking lie that doesn't give a shit about your integrity or the integrity of the conversation. You're not arguing against communists advocating for violence against an imperialist state. What we're arguing against is fascist manipulation and lies.
Now, if you want to have a conversation about the legal standards, we can absolutely have a conversation about the legal standards. But that is where I come from, where I genuinely do think that an additional expansion on the already existing restrictions on freedom of speech would be with very clear guidelines. Okay, with very clear guidelines would be beneficial. Now, I
totally disagree. I think we have it perfect in the United States in terms of our case law, in terms of how the First Amendment has been interpreted. And also remember, it's because we have the First Amendment that even idiots and assholes like Antonin Scalia had to rule that, hey, listen, these leftists who burn the American flag, I know that, you know, this is overwhelmingly despised in the country when you take polls on it. And I know that you hate these people who burned our flag. But the great thing about America is that we live in a country that's free enough that allows you to burn the flag without locking you up.
American case law is perfect. You have seriously got to be fucking kidding me. Oh, because we can burn flags. Antonin Scalia and whatever. So it's fucking perfect? It's perfect. That's good news. Apparently we live in a fucking utopia because of American fucking case law. As made evident by we can burn a flag. But hey, if you take a knee while people are fucking jerking off all over it, your life can be destroyed. You know, because perfect fucking American case law. Give me a goddamn break, Kyle. Listen to yourself, man. Seriously.
I think that's one of the best things about America is that we have freedom of speech. And then the final point I want to make on this is, listen, just real quick, you're not allowed to do free speech absolutism is not the same thing as free speech anarchy. So I'm not a free speech anarchist, but I am a free speech absolutist. So what that means is you're not allowed to do direct threats of violence. And I totally agree with that. You're also not allowed to do libel or slander. And again, totally agree with that. If you want to talk about like social media platforms, would I be okay with the rule against doxing? Yeah, I'm for that. Again, I'm not a free speech anarchist. I'm a free speech absolutist.
So you're against doxing too?
If you want to know why my tone has been really angry throughout a lot of this, it's because of that fucking clip. Free speech anarchism? Where the fuck do you get off, Kyle? You associate anarchism with libel? Fuck you, Holmes. For real, man. You don't know shit about anarchism. Your alternative to your fucking weird fantasy canard of free speech fucking absolutism, which you don't even adhere to because you call for advocations of violence not being a part of free speech absolutism. But, you know, absolutism means everything, Kyle. It means literally, absolutely everything. You're not a free speech absolutist. And your alternative to that is free speech anarchism? Fuck you, Holmes. Anarchists from the inception of capitalism have been fighting for free speech. The reason you even know the concept exists is because of anarchists. And you want to associate us with libelous because you can't back your fucking argument? That's your little carve out? That's your little caveat for your ridiculous notion of free speech absolutism is you're not a free speech anarchist? I'm a fucking free speech anarchist, bro. Because I care about the emancipation of all people from the oppression of capitalism. I'm an anarchist, Kyle, and I believe in free speech. But what I don't believe in is free, unmitigated spreading of destructive, weaponized fucking lies. And if you don't like my tone, you want to call me triggered, there's a reason for it, man. You don't understand anarchism. And you are throwing immense history under the bus. So many of your quote unquote progressive values were fought hard for and blood shed for and lives lost for by fucking anarchists, man. But you know, you don't believe in free speech anarchism. You believe in some imaginary notion of fucking free speech absolutism. Fuck free speech absolutism. I don't want disgusting, oppressive fucking liars backed by billionaires distorting the minds of my fellow fucking humanity at the expense of dying fucking children at the American-Mexican fucking border. Free speech anarchism. Fuck off.
Am I against
not
doxing?
doxing? Yeah. Not doxing personal information in the sense that like they're doxing their houses and whatever, but revealing the identity of people who are participating in these sorts of activities is 100% have been an effective way to combat the rise of.
If Twitter or Facebook said, "Hey, listen, we have a terms of service. Here are our rules. We're going to be open and transparent about it. We're going to have a system and a process that you can see if something happens where somebody gets deplatformed." I'm saying if they included on their list of things, no direct threats of violence, no doxing, I'm totally for it. But bottom line is, my main thesis is we have to lean as heavily as possible on the side of free speech because that's freedom, and that's
the heart of Kyle,
what it means to be free.
But Kyle, you yourself have explained that historically, even with this beautiful freedom of speech country that we have, with all of these beautiful free speech laws that we have, you yourself have described that most of the time, actually almost all of the time, the people that have opinions that are deemed a threat to the material goals of the U.S. empire oftentimes are the ones who are getting jailed or who are losing their jobs regardless. So why not fight back against not only the Nazis, but also the system itself? Because I understand the dangerous precedent that we're setting, but that precedent already exists. The reason why we don't talk, I mean, you and I agree on this when it comes to like defending Chelsea Manning, when it comes to defending Edward Snowden, when it comes to defending maybe even Reality Winner. I don't know what your perspective is on that, but we already lock up people for having positions that are deemed harmful to the goals, to the overall goals of the United States. We already deplatform people like Noam Chomsky in this country where we're supposed to have free speech absolutism, and we already don't have that. Do you see what I'm saying? So
yeah, but you're just arguing for more of my position.
No, I'm saying that it doesn't work. That doesn't exist currently. So what we need to do is at least not, even if you're
compared to any country. The other countries that have hate speech laws, they have a worse system.
Yes, that's why I'm talking about adding additional restrictions on our existing hate laws. I mean, existing laws when it comes to freedom of speech, because we already have restrictions placed upon freedom of speech despite our First Amendment. So an incitement of hatred, which is already successful in all of these other countries, from Europe and all of these other comparable Western developed nations, from Europe to Canada.
Way too subjective. Way too subjective. But incitement of hatred. Are you kidding me? They could use that against us, Haas.
I understand that, but my point is they're already using that against us without it. So at the very least...
No, Noam Chomsky's not sitting in a jail in Toledo, Ohio.
I understand that, but Noam Chomsky, first of all, Noam Chomsky is effectively deplatformed from all avenues, right? Like, he's not on mainstream media. He hasn't been on mainstream media since 1967 or some shit, when the last time he was on there, he was protesting the Vietnam War, and ever since then, he has never been back on CNN or MSNBC, if I'm not mistaken. So what I'm trying to say is currently we have privatized tyranny, and we have to fight back against it, because the only thing that people like yourself who are allies to the left or members of the left are doing when they try to make it when they actively fight for these sort of things is to provide an additional hurdle for leftists to overcome when they're trying to defend the rights of marginalized communities. Every single protest that has been successful in our past that we take for granted now was eventually violent. Do you see what I'm saying?
I don't. I have the exact opposite interpretation. In fact, one of my core points that I'm trying to make to you, and apparently I'm doing it ineffectively, is to try to explain to you that case law in the United States demonstrates very clearly that freedom of speech, the more we abide by it, the better it is for marginalized communities. That's the point I'm trying to make.
It's better for marginalized communities because it protects the truth about the reality of marginalized communities. But fascists are perverting that to sell lies, like, for instance, that oppressed marginalized communities aren't oppressed marginalized communities. So yes, when free truth is spread to the masses, glory fucking ensues. But this perversion of the constitutional notion of free speech, which was written by a bunch of fucking people who owned people, is perverting the spread of truth.
No, I know the point you're trying to make.
Right.
And what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that despite our current free speech absolutist understanding in the United States, we still are effectively deplatforming and leftist speakers by not having anyone who opposes capitalism in a meaningful and deliberate way on any of the platforms that are designated. And you're a Noam Chomsky fan, so you're already familiar with this, on any of the mainstream media platforms, because the ultimate goal of mainstream media is to uphold Western imperialism and uphold capitalism and the status quo in meaningful ways. So that already doesn't happen. You get articles written about Richard Spencer and how handsome he is, but you don't necessarily get articles about the left. And the reason why you don't get articles about leftists is deliberate. Because we have a structural opposition. We pose a structural threat to the future of the United States versus Nazis don't. As a matter of fact, they are supported by even members of the administration, because racism is different than class warfare. It drives a wedge. That sort of identity politics drives a wedge in class consciousness and in any sort of progressive collective action. So that's precisely why the freedom of speech only exists to protect white nationalists currently.
Okay, well then again, that final nugget you put on the end of that there, that's the opposite of the point I was making. You're with me until the end where you say, well, that's why the freedom of speech only protects white nationalists. No, case law is free speech protections end up being good for marginalized communities. We were able to protect the Black Panthers. You're able to protect, gay groups marching in areas that don't want them because of free speech protections.
I don't know what fucking planet you live on, homeboy, but I think I mentioned that Fred Hampton was fucking murdered. I also know that the only reason fucking Pride exists is because a lot of fucking righteous LGBTQ community people said, fuck this, and rioted like righteous motherfuckers in the street. And then because they're fabulous as fuck, they partied afterwards. And now we have this wonderful tradition called Pride. It didn't have nothing to do with case law. And you also just contradicted yourself, man. You talked about how case law shut down the Black Panthers, and now you're talking about how it helped them? It didn't fucking help the Black Panthers, bro. Last I checked, I don't see Black Panthers walking down the street fucking uniform, trained, on point with their shit, with shotguns, in formation, walking down any street of this fucking country. Case law did nothing to help the LGBTQ community in this country, nor did it do anything to help the fucking Black Panthers. These people fought hard and shed fucking blood for what inkling we have of a remembrance of their struggle. It was not fucking case law.
If you say to me, hey, Kyle, let's start this movement to try to get, let's do some social media activism to try to get Noam Chomsky, or he's a bad example because he's so old now, but anybody who's a leftist who's, prominent to get on
but Kyle,
on mainstream media sites, I would agree with that. I would say, let's try to get them on there.
Okay,
but then the thing is, the point that I'm making is when they try to deplatform that person, we have to be principled. And now, we have to say, hey, listen, we don't want Chomsky deplatformed. And we're also the kind of people who didn't partake in the social media mob trying to get our ideological foes deplatformed.
Okay, but Kyle, who is, you say that the government currently stands to protect the interest of the many, and this includes marginalized communities as well. Who is, and I think if you think about this a little bit more, it will help you maybe develop a different perspective. I
think the same for you.
Who is the? No, I've thought about this. I used to be a free speech absolutist. That's why I'm. That's why my position has changed.
You've evolved, bro. You've gone beyond the naive position that we have.
Come on. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
I am. I absolutely am, Haas. You fucking have evolved. You've evolved in your intellectual understanding. You've evolved in your education of capitalism. And I'm sorry that makes Kyle uncomfortable and that he fucking gaslighted you. Oh, you've evolved. So what Kyle is ultimately saying is that Haas has a delusional, aggrandized opinion of himself. He doesn't. He doesn't. He actually does have a better grasp on the macro fucking conditions that are contributing to this fucking argument. And you straight up did gaslight him, Kyle. And I am going to reiterate it. Haas has evolved. That doesn't make him smarter and better and have a bigger brain than you. It's not a Darwinian fucking physical evolution. But his education has evolved beyond yours. And in that moment, Kyle, you knew it. And so you gaslighted him. And you belittled that fucking reality. Bad fucking form.
I'm not. Sorry. Of course. Dude, I respect everything you say, and I respect your perspective. I'm just trying to
make
maybe
your point. I don't.
Bad form again, man. You gaslight the dude and send him on his back foot, so he starts to reel as he processes that. And as he's doing that, you're like, get on point, man. Make your point. Wow, man. A lot of fascists did that to me on the street, Kyle. Straight up. Get real with that.
Yeah, to make a point about something that you may not have considered, which is that, again, when the state does brutal and violent things, and this is like the police working against protesters, we call it an uprising, or we call it a rebellion, or we call it a riot, and any sort of violence against those protesters, oftentimes on the left, is deemed like a normal thing. It's deemed routine. The way we analyze violence currently is what goes beyond the norm. And this is very effective in analyzing leftist movements. Every time they're like the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, anytime that, or Stonewall, anytime there is leftist mobilization that is effective, the state does not protect them. The state doesn't go, oh, well, it's their First Amendment rights. The state tries to squash it with with brutality, with the police force. So
you're conflating two different issues here. The point is that if you had,
but how? That's the state not defending their First Amendment rights, Kyle. That's literally what I'm saying.
By having crackdowns on, but the thing is, there's really not violent crackdowns on peaceful protests. If a protest, if the cops get any inkling of an excuse like, oh my God, they broke a window, so now we're going to unleash hell on them and we're going to use tear gas and we're going to be decked out in our military gear. Yeah, that's wrong and that's bad, and I disagree with that.
Okay, that ain't the argument, man. I'll tell you what, Kyle. I was on the street in Berkeley just about 3 months ago, and the cops shot rubber bullets and projectiles and fucking flashbangs at a totally peaceful fucking group of counter demonstrators to fascism. Unprovoked. No one had thrown anything at them or broken any windows. And I was right there, Kyle. Me and my comrade, Just Mike, were standing up fucking front when a whole line of cops just unleashed violence on us. And you know what? The literal day before, they did the same exact thing up north in Portland. Shot projectiles and flashbangs and smoke bombs at straight up peaceful fucking protesters. And they were protesting against the Proud Boys. Fascist fucking street thugs, man. You're fucking kidding me with this bullshit that the state doesn't commit violence against peaceful fucking protesters. J20, motherfucker. Those defendants lost thousands and thousands of dollars. Their lives have been immeasurably fucking affected for years to come because of the violence committed against them by the state.
Yes. But the fact of the matter is, you can have a Malcolm X speak in a public square because of free speech protection. You did have that. Even back then. Even back in the 1960s, you had a Malcolm X speaking in a very public, open area in Harlem because they can't crack down on him because we have free speech protections. If you want to give, if the government is so bad, why would you want to give them more of an excuse to crack down on the freedom of people like us?
Okay, again,
we need to get past this issue, though, because we've been arguing about this for 40 minutes, and I know you have more you want to get to, and I know you have a guest you want to bring on.
What fucking dream world do you live in, man? Malcolm X was perpetually fucking hunted and lived in perpetual fucking fear of his life because of the state. And he was perpetually hounded by that state. Every step he made. When he went to Mecca, every move he made throughout the United States, he was hounded and dogged by the FBI. His life was under constant threat. And the only people protecting him, the only fucking people protecting him was his fellow Muslim comrades with shotguns and shit. Which were understandably ineffective in protecting his life. Because he didn't have any fucking case law or the state there preventing his murder. So he was shot down in a public fucking space, practicing his fucking free speech. Now, he doesn't practice it at all. And you want to use Malcolm X to defend fascists? Fuck off, Kyle. Seriously, man. Read a few fucking books, homeboy. You and your fucking studio and the videos that you fucking watched. Here's another fucking wake-up call, bro. While you're defending their fucking free speech. When they're done with their little rallies, they go out and they abuse fucking all sorts of people throughout the community that they spoke in earlier that night. That is a regular fucking pattern. When they first hit Berkeley and started doing their rallies, they went out any window that had a Black Lives Matter fucking sign in their window, got busted out. By who? By who? Who knows? Who knows, man? And in every single fucking instance that there has been one of these fucking fascist rallies in the street, which is perpetuated and bolstered and facilitated by these online fucking fascist voices, they have abused some type of woman or liberal or trans person. In every single case. They finish their rally, they get drunk, and then they go out marauding throughout the communities, beating on fucking people. And what we saw in that bourgeois fucking Upper East Side fucking manifestation of this shit is that the cops gave them escort as they ran through the fucking the streets of New York City celebrating their mass mob violence against another person. This is not about the fucking marketplace of ideas. This is not about free speech. This is about lies. Oppressive lies that weaponize the most ignorant, misinformed, dangerous fucking people in our communities. Who create pipe bombs. Who shoot up synagogues. Who get mad because Trump isn't anti-Semitic enough. People who go out and think that liberals are terrorists and real fascists and the real Hitler because Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, and Dinesh D'Souza get to use our online town square to spread that lie. And we are not calling for violence as a tactic. Okay. So for starters, free marketplace of ideas. If Nazis want to come out, or fascists from whatever stripe of fascism want to come out in the street and go, hey, check it out. We want to tell you why fucking fascism is awesome and why being a bigot is fucking awesome and why being a misogynist and a homophobe and a transphobe is awesome. Okay. Okay, let them come out and say that. And they have. And in the thousands, they came out and said, yeah, that's bullshit. Fuck off. Don't say that shit in our community. We don't want it. But here's the problem. Is for the most part, they're not coming out and just saying that flat out. They're not saying, hey, we want to murder all the trans people. So we're going to come out and try and convince you why we think they're disgusting and should be murdered. Nah, they're coming out and saying, no, we got a trans friend. And we're not fascists and we don't ultimately want to fucking, end their right to exist. It's dishonest. Back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, a whole bunch of people came out in America and said, yeah, we're Nazis, straight up. And we hate all kinds of minorities and black people and gay people and Jews and all this stuff. And when they saw it on Geraldo and all that stuff, a lot of people were disgusted by it. But what people don't know is that a lot of proper traditional skinheads fought those fuckers in the street and shut them the fuck up. But it was easier to beat them back then because, one, they didn't have a president in office that was being like, yeah, fucking, good people on both sides in Charlottesville where they murdered Heather Heyer. Where Nazis said, fucking, blood and soil and Jews will not replace us. They didn't have a president like that back in the 90s. But they're not coming out and saying, hey, check it out. I mean, it's like they slipped. When it came to Charlottesville, they slipped. Their narrative had been, no, we're not that. We're so totally not the Nazis that you saw in the late 80s and the early 90s. No, we're not fascists. We're not Nazi skinheads, boneheads. But we're this different thing, and we're just, defending America and patriotism against, people who want to invade our borders, which is just nationalism, which is the same thing they were saying back then. But because we're sharing the marketplace of fucking ideas with them, we have to sparse out, like, no, man, these are the same exact fucking people as the neo-Nazis from back in the 80s and 90s, practicing all different sorts of forms of cultural appropriation, whether it's, my personal pet peeve, punk rock and skinhead culture, but it's also trans culture and minority rights stuff. People from Patriot Prayer letting Black Lives Matter get up at some rally and say something and acting like they got their back. When in the end, they're standing next to Proud Boys and other white nationalists. Going, no, we're not fascists. Free speech. Why are you trying to stop our free speech? And then that makes people in the center, like Kyle, go, oh, well, I'm a free speech absolutist. I ain't trying to, I care about, First Amendment. Don't tell me. And then the right wing goes, ha, gotcha, fucker. Gotcha. That's their trap. I don't give a fuck about free speech. None of these fascist fucks give a fuck about free speech. They just want to see centrists and progressives and liberals argue endlessly the First Amendment, while meanwhile, in the midst of all this, they're like selling their bullshit that culminates in, we need a border wall. Now, I want to clarify a couple things I said that could be misconstrued, or maybe I was just wrong, whatever. But I want to clarify a couple things that I said earlier in the video. First one is in relation to Joe Blow Baker, right? There has been activity where far leftists have gone into gentrified neighborhoods that used to be the only place where completely impoverished people could make a fucking buck or get their junk. Hey, a bunch of fucking, bougie people come in, open a cafe, some artists come in, righteous fucking artists, cool people, whatever, come in because property values are cheap. Next thing you know, that's the cool fucking place in town. And next thing you know, big giant fucking disgusting fucking scumbag realtors realize, hey, the property value is about to go up in this neighborhood. So they buy up all the areas, the surrounding surrounding areas and boost up the fucking property values, which means all the people that used to be able to afford there can't afford to fucking live there anymore. And next thing you know, a bunch of people who never gave a shit about that street where these people found their only place where they could afford to live but can't anymore. Now all these fucking bougie motherfuckers are up there having cafe lattes and specialty fucking burritos. And there have been some very isolated cases where very far leftists have seen that scenario and been disgusted and tried to fight back, and they've smashed some fucking windows of people, businesses that might have been owned by someone like a local Joe Blow baker. But this is incredibly rare. And it was also in relation to, like, it was just a diversionary argumentative tactic that Kyle used to, like, saddle violence to the deplatforming argument, where there is no violence being used. Now, another thing I'd like to clarify is I mentioned that all people should have an equal platform. No, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think that you should earn a platform. You know, if people dig your shit, cool, then you'll earn more followers. And if they don't, then you won't. But having the Mercers or the Kochs or whatever other fucking nefarious billionaire fucking family putting millions of dollars behind your platform so that you can dominate the conversation in our online community, yeah, fuck that shit. Fuck that shit. How is that free speech? Okay, so look, this really does get to the nature of the First Amendment in general, okay? So the First Amendment has long been interpreted to mean however you feel about the racist people owning scumbags that fucking drafted it. But it has long been interpreted to protect the voices of the oppressed by the state itself. Okay? Now, the First Amendment, in terms of the fascists, is not being used to protect minority speech in self-defense against the aggressive, oppressive mechanisms of power. It's being used to oppress marginalized voices of oppression in defense of the power that oppresses them. All right, so this brings me to different precedences in relation to the importance of intent. Okay, so earlier in the video, Haas and Kyle talked a little bit about European laws in terms of in relation to incitement to hatred. And, you know, Kyle said, oh, you know, that could so easily be used against us, Haas. And I would venture to guess that that very argument in and of itself has its roots in European far-right fascist movements, because it's their language that it would hurt. Now, it hasn't exactly completely stopped the rise of fascism in Europe, but that's the very those are the very laws that fascists in Europe are going after. And Kyle's here arguing narratives that sound a whole lot like far-right fuckbags that I've heard spew bullshit out of Europe. Just saying. So if you don't understand the nature and root of that argument and aren't able to then transpose it against the actual real-time atmosphere of our U.S.-based mass media, which, I mean, it's basically the capitalists decided, okay, here's the breakdown of how we're going to sell the framing of political discussion in America. They said, we're going to plant Fox News as the far extremist right and let people believe that Fox News is the extremist, farthest, most, wackadoodle bullshit that the right can come up with, which isn't true. Have you seen fucking Breitbart or, Milo or, Sargon or, on and on and on. But they frame Fox News as being the far rightist possible. Then CNN, that's apparently the centrist voice. Okay? And then MSNBC, that's your extreme left, pinko, commie, anarchist, everything is ruled by George Soros, Antifa, leftist extremism. And all three of those are variations on centrism, if not full-on fucking deep-throated support of capitalist authoritarianism. That's all immense heaping piles of fucking flaming bullshit. None, all backed and bolstered by this fucking nonsensical argument centered around free speech. They're not coming out and going, hey, check it out. Here's our methodology for oppressing the fuck out of you. And then giving us the proper opportunity to respond to those fucking policies of destruction and devastation and oppression. If they were, that would be the fucking marketplace of ideas. But it's a massive billionaire and now approaching trillionaire backed misinformation campaign that protects a handful of successful fucking capitalists at the expense of literally the fucking rest of us. So what we need to do is get all these fucking lies out of the marketplace of ideas so that we can actually engage in a true exchange of 21st century understanding of human intellectual evolution. We're not having that fucking discussion. We're not even fucking approaching that discussion. We're trying to convince people that tear gassing children at the fucking Mexican border isn't what Jesus would do. Are you fucking serious with this? Seriously, that's the discussion we're having. People thinking that Jesus would back that shit. But we have had some precedences, like I mentioned earlier, where we made the distinction about intent in the way with which we provide information. Now, I want to show you a little video here real quick. It's about the fairness doctrine. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating that we should completely reinstate the fairness doctrine in the exact same way it was written before and whatever. It had its fucking problems and its issues. But I'll get into this more when I come back from playing it. But having done away with the fairness doctrine, one could argue, is what's unleashed this just maelstrom of fucking shark tornado, fucking vomit and destruction and maggoty death that is what we're now calling, free speech, whatever.
The Fairness Doctrine was a policy of the United States Federal Communications Commission (FCC), introduced in 1949, that required the holders of broadcast licenses both to present controversial issues of public importance and to do so in a manner that was, in the Commission's view, honest, equitable, and balanced. The FCC, which was believed to have been under pressure from then-President Ronald Reagan, eliminated the doctrine in 1987. The FCC formally removed the language that implemented the doctrine in August 2011. The Fairness Doctrine had two basic elements. It required broadcasters to devote some of their airtime to discussing controversial matters of public interest, and to air contrasting views regarding those matters. Stations were given wide latitude as to how to provide contrasting views. It could be done through news segments, public affairs shows, or editorials. The doctrine did not require equal time for opposing views, but required that contrasting viewpoints be presented. The demise of this FCC rule has been considered by some to be a contributing factor for the rising level of party polarization in the United States. The main agenda for the doctrine was to ensure that viewers were exposed to a diversity of viewpoints. In 1969, the United States Supreme Court upheld the FCC's general right to enforce the Fairness Doctrine where channels were limited. But the courts did not rule that the FCC was obliged to do so. The courts reasoned that the scarcity of the broadcast spectrum, which limited the opportunity for access to the airwaves, created a need for the doctrine. However, the proliferation of cable television, multiple channels within cable, public access channels, and the Internet have eroded this argument, since there are plenty of places for ordinary individuals to make public comments on controversial issues at low or no cost at all. The Fairness Doctrine should not be confused with the Equal Time Rule. The Fairness Doctrine deals with discussion of controversial issues, while the Equal Time Rule deals only with political candidates.
When Reagan ended the Fairness Doctrine, that's when Rush Limbaugh gained all the power he had. Now, he's a waning person and people don't understand the importance of him anymore, but he is the birth. There would be no Steven Crowder. There would be no Ben Shapiro. And there would most assuredly be no Fox News in the way it is today had it not been for the foundation created by people like Rush Limbaugh and early on Glenn Beck too in radio. But it was the elimination of the Fairness Doctrine that gave them the ability to just spew fucking unfiltered lies and not be questioned or challenged on it. And even if they were challenged on it, it didn't matter. They could just keep doing it because they would just sell you another lie to cover up the lie. Like you see every single day from Donald Trump. He says a lie and then he gets called on it, and then it's just watching his minions come out and sell another lie to cover the lie he told before. Now, I'm not saying, again, that I want the Fairness Doctrine reinstated in the way it was before, but we did have a point where we understood, even under your fucking liberal representative democracy fucking constitutional obsession, that met that standard. That we said, look, if you're going to come out and you're going to spew your shit, you need to give equal time to the argument against it so that all the masses can see it. We don't have that fucking equal time anymore. We never really had it even back then. But what little restrictions, what little bits and pieces we could get out of people like Edward R. Murrow or Walter Cronkite, where they were held to a certain fucking standard at least, which spoke to the nature of intent. We should we can as a society collectively decide that if your intent is to subvert the prosperity, the collective prosperity of all people for the benefit of a handful of few, at the expense of all those others, well, give equal time to the argument against it so that we can all see it. And then, because we will collectively go, nah, sorry, fuck that. But that's not the playing field. And we've got liberals and progressives wallowed in the mire of this free speech fucking absolutism, whatever, blah, blah, blah fucking nonsense. that all it does is facilitate imperialist fucking tyranny on the masses of this one planet that we all fucking live on. Deplatform these motherfuckers. Fucking for real, right now. They're a bunch of lying fucking pieces of shit. And their words result in the devastation, poverty, and suffering, and ultimately murder of countless people around the planet.
And so for all practical purposes, truth had been abolished in Germany. A lot of my German friends wondered what had hit them. How did it happen? Where did it start? It started right here. And this was where it could have been stopped. If those people had stood together, if they had protected each other, they could have resisted the Nazi threat. Together they would have been strong. But once they allowed themselves to be split apart, they were helpless. When that first minority lost out, everybody lost out. They made the mistake of gambling with other people's freedom. Now let's see how those bets paid off. Karl the farmer was gambling on a better life for himself. What he got was extra hours of back-breaking work, as much as 100 hours a week. He was forced to stay on his land and produce what he was told to produce, because now Hitler was preparing for war. For Heinrich, who owned a hardware store, the bet didn't pay off either. 104,000 small businesses were closed in 2 years. And for Hans, conditions hadn't improved any. He had a job now in a munitions factory, but he worked long hours for little pay. The working conditions grew increasingly bad. And even though he didn't like the job, he wasn't permitted to leave it. And when Hitler decided the time was right, Germany went to war. Not by declaring war, but by a carefully prepared sneak attack. Once again, Hitler needed Hans to do his dirty work. Hans was an expert at brutality this time, and Hitler had decided to use Hans and his brutality against other peoples, the Czechs, the Poles, the French, the Russians. But in the crucial test of war, Hitler's race theories didn't pay off. His pure-blooded supermen were defeated by the mongrel armies he despised, by the British of El Alamein, by the Russians at Stalingrad, then on D-Day by American soldiers of every color and religion, who smashed across the Normandy beaches and drove on through to the heart of Germany. For the misguided Germans who had swallowed the Nazi bait, the Nazi game did not pay off. The continent of Europe was strewn with millions of German bodies, pure Aryan bodies. Karl the farmer was left in the snow outside of Moscow. Heinrich stayed in Italy at Salerno. And Hans, who was going to rule the world, got only a little patch of Normandy that he could call his own. We must never let that happen to us or to our country. We must never let ourselves be divided by race or color or religion, because in this country we all belong to minority groups. I was born in Hungary. You are a Mason. These are minorities. And then you belong to other minority groups too. You are a farmer. You have blue eyes. You go to the Methodist Church. Your right to belong to these minorities is a precious thing. You have a right to be what you are and say what you think, because here we have personal freedom. We have liberty. And these are not just fancy words. This is a practical and priceless way of living. But we must work at it. We must guard everyone's liberty, or we can lose our own. If we allow any minority to lose its freedom by persecution or by prejudice, we are threatening our own freedom. And this is not simply an idea. This is good, hard common sense. You see, Here in America is not a question whether we tolerate minorities. America is minorities. And that means you and me. So let's not be suckers. We must not allow the freedom or dignity of any man to be threatened by any act or word. Let's be selfish about it. Let's forget about we and they. Let's think about us.
And finally, Hitler confesses, he says, only one thing could have broken our movement. If the adversary had understood its principle and from the first day had smashed with the most extreme brutality the nucleus of our new movement, who could know better than he? My time is up. I'm sorry I didn't get to address the collaboration point, but I'll speak to that later. Thank you for listening.